Okay, this is my second book review. This one hopefully won't be too long. This one is Dan Simmons Hyperion. I will briefly cover the Fall of Hyperion as well, because it's the second one in the series. The books are a bit different, and I can't tell you too much without giving away the plot and the story too much. It's set in the distant future, and the Earth's been destroyed by this mysterious, what they call the Big Mistake, and it has a date after it. I can't remember, I do apologise, I'm sure someone will put in the comments box what it is. And humans sort of branch out to different planets, and they all connect by this mysterious singularity portals called Farcasters. And Farcasters were created by the Technocore, which is artificial intelligence. In fact, that's Dan Simmons has said he doesn't like it. He's even mentioned in the book that it's not, the AI doesn't stand for artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence stands for, I think it was autonomative intelligence. I can't remember, and it's late, so I'm sure again someone will correct me. Anyway, it was created by the Technocore, and they run most of the technology for mankind. Not necessarily governed by mankind, perhaps on par with mankind with things like that. Again, I can't go into too much without giving a lot away. These Farcasters create a world web. This is allowing matter such as ships and people to travel vast distances in an instant. And mankind is governed by a system that's called the hegemony. Sorry, again, it's late, I'm tired. I'm reading a couple of notes I put down, so it makes more sense. I'll stop breaking in and out here. Hegemony, run by the CEO and a group of advisors. And the book Hyperion itself deals with the pilgrimage of several seemingly random and very different characters who are seeking this mysterious creature called the Shrike. And not much is known about the Shrike. It's a very tall, full-armed, menacing creature covered in razor wire and thorns, sort of metal spikes. And the Shrike appears to act of its own accord, but towards an unknown goal. It's quite a mysterious thing in the book, because when it pops up, you're really intrigued when it comes up. It's interesting what happens, and it might only be in there for a very brief moment, but you try to determine why it's there and what's just happened and why it's happened. And sometimes the order of events that are placed, you can't quite put your finger on it. I kind of like why that's done. And the Shrike's quite feared and hated. It's also worshipped by many, but it appears to move in a flash very quickly, as if it doesn't quite correspond to time, and that's something interesting that comes up. And as the characters journey towards the time tombs, this is where the Shrike is based. They start telling their background stories during this pilgrimage on their travels, and the book goes back and forth between the character stories. So you've got really small little stories, and some of them, so they're fantastic actually. Some of these are really cool little separate stories within a story about this character's background and why they're on this pilgrimage. And there's several different characters on this pilgrimage. You've got a priest, a soldier, a poet, detective, a scholar, a consul, and a Templar. And you'll have to read more to find out what the Templar is, because there's only so much you want to say. I mean, there is so much packed into this book. There's a lot of fantasy, and there's a lot of science. In fact, they're called the Hyperion. There's 4 books. Initially, these two, Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion, and then you've got Endominion, and then the Rise of Endominion, and the characters. Then most of the characters appear in the books, but the other two books are more their own little thing away from the first two. And the reason why I've said, I'm going to leave you to read about these characters. Oh no, where I was going with that, before my mind went blank, I mentioned physics, a lot of metaphysics and theoretical physics involved here. Singularities, again with the technologies, very technologically advanced humans we're talking about, and AI. And with the later, not these two, not with the two Hyperion books, there's some physics equations in there which I really enjoy all that. It's very, very basic, you know, and it's not put in there to undermine you. You're told what's going on, and it just happens to have the equations in there. Anyway, I'll get back to these two because I'm not talking about the other two books. And so you've got all these different stories that are telling on their pilgrimage, and I really enjoyed the Poet's Tale. In fact, he was my favourite character. This book is, the way it's written is very different to the way this one is set out. This one is the group of people journeying towards a goal, and you're reading their backstory, and then something happens, or doesn't happen, and then and then this book is much more generic in the way it's told. So you still get flashbacks, but it's not. You're already introduced to the characters. You don't need to keep going back and forth. So you're not to expect the exact kind of layout for the second book. It's very good in its own right, but it's coming at you from a different angle. And yeah, as I mentioned with the backstories, Dan Simmons really made these characters come to life. You start, as any book, you start to form a like or dislike for certain characters, but there's some characters in here you really don't like, or you really like, and there's some that you know you shouldn't like them, but you do. There's some really strong characters in here, and strong female characters as well, not just strong male characters, and that's a big credit, and certainly widens your audience, because you certainly in maybe a bit further back, because these are relatively modern, the female characters tend to be princesses or need to be saved, or if they are slightly stronger, you know, they're not higher up the food chain, they're not CEOs, they're not prime ministers, presidents, kings, queens, in the sense that you feel them as an authoritative presence a lot of the time, or you're aware that there's something else going on with them. And that's a big credit to these books, is that the female and the male characters are just as strong as each other. And where I've had books where female friends might not have enjoyed the book so much because they feel like there's too many male main characters, or too much focus on the male characters being stronger, or a particular way, and the female characters getting pushed aside slightly, or not having enough of the story. This very much the opposite of that. It's I really enjoy. I know there's probably a very, very small percentage out there that won't enjoy that, but I feel it makes the book stronger for having that in it. Yeah, and the story will it will keep you guessing. I mean, this thing, there's so many twists and turns, and at first things you try. I like the way it lets you interpret, or try to interpret what's going on without letting you know what's going on, or it will surprise you from a different angle. And as mentioned, there's a lot of science, physics, metaphysics involved. More later on. I mean, it is present in this first one and the Fall of Hyperion, but mostly in the last two, it's the metaphysics, and again, I can't really go into too much. There's a lot there, but I mean, it's not. I don't think it would be a difficult read in general, but I think someone who's not used to reading science fiction type books might find that rather daunting if they haven't read it before and they jump straight into this. But I think they've heard of this, or they've come across this book and they realise, you know, they're into science fiction by then, I'd assume. But if you're starting off, have an open mind. I mean, even for people who read science fiction, you need an open mind for this book. But it's, yeah, I mean, again, the things with the Shrike, you really want to know what this thing is. You're like, what is it? And then at one point you sort of think you know what's going on, and you don't. It's well done. It's just, you know. And the second book is, I mentioned it's different styles of the first book. And I've mentioned in my notes here, the first one is, you hear about the character stories, it jumps back and forth a la Canterbury Tales. Yeah, I can see why I put that. An incredible amount of time, thought and research goes into all Dan Simmons' book, and you can see it with this, you know, it's no exception here. Especially with some of the science, and I mean there's Catholicism in there as well. I don't want that to put you off or make you intrigued for the wrong reason. It's not a Catholic book. This happens to be a character that's from, the priest is Catholic, and there's an interesting few roots in there to do with Catholicism, but it's not aimed at Catholicism or anti-religious at all, or pro-religious. It's I mean, you have to read it. It's interesting take. I think anyone can get the wrong end of the stick with something, but it's not easy to get the wrong end of the stick with the way it's like that particular story and the way it unfolds throughout all the books. Again, I'd recommend those that are open to want to experience a journey of a mystery, but enjoy science and a bit of fantasy, and vice versa. Again, I wouldn't recommend this. Obviously, it's not a child's book. I wouldn't recommend this to someone that's very young, but I think maybe, if I'm trying to think of myself, maybe 15, 20 years ago, maybe even as a teenager, trying to read this, but I think I would have enjoyed it. But it is the kind of series that will have you going back again later on in life, because I've only read this series, all 4 books, once, and I will be going back and reading them again at some point. It might be a while, because I've only sort of finished reading them at some point in this year, and I've gone back to review it, hence the note. Yeah, it's not recommended for someone. It's not recommended for people who want just a linear book that's easily predictable, and they just want to read through it in the morning while they're commuting and they're travelling and you're half asleep. It's not really for that kind of thing. I think you'd find it a bit frustrating. Actually, the first book might be okay for that kind of thing, but I think later on, some of the other books you'd find difficult if you came across it like that. Again, there's a lot of philosophy and metaphysics in there. But it's an amazing book, an amazing series of books. I know Dan Simmons probably would hate me saying series of books, and he would have told you he probably wrote these as one thing, but they come out separately. And the same with the other 2. But if you get a chance and you're into this kind of thing, please give it a read. I think you'll really enjoy it. Okay. Thank you all.